Good morning. My name is Nick Higgins. I'm from the Brooklyn Public Library, recording a veteran's oral history of Mr. Richard Haile. We're at the Shinnecock Museum and Reservation in Long Island, New York. The date is February 22nd, 2014. And we're recording the story for the Library of Congress Veterans Oral History Project. Mr. Haile, thank you for being on this interview. So maybe we can start by just maybe you'd like to talk about where you're from.
Well, good morning, and thank you for inviting me. Most people call me Dick instead of Richard.
All right, Dick.
I start out that way.
Sure.
I grew up in Columbia, South Carolina, but after I got out of the Army, I finished college, and I got a job up north.
Mm-hmm.
I worked for General Electric about 32 years, and when I retired, I moved down to the Shinnecock Reservation with my wife. So we've been here about 24 years, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And when you were in, so you grew up in South Carolina. So you did you have any relatives who were in the military? Is that why you were interested in? Were you drafted?
Actually, I was drafted, but before I was drafted, I forget whether I was 17 or early 18 years old. I decided that I would rather be in the Navy than the Army. There was a lot of talk about the 18-year-old draft, so I went down to the recruiting office in Columbia, and I was interviewed, and I had trouble with the eye test.
Mm-hmm.
My right eye was good, but my left eye was not. So the recruiter kept telling me to walk a little closer. He said, "I'll tell you before you bump into it." But I could not pass the eye test with my left eye. So he thanked me for coming and told me goodbye.
All right.
So I sat back, and the draft came along. I was 18 at that time, so I kind of about the second wave of the 18-year-old draft.
Mm-hmm.
And I passed the Army entrance test, but I had to be put on limited service because of my bad eyesight.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I went to basic training in Fort Belvoir, Virginia, with an engineer corps. They had an ERTC, Engineering Replacement Training Center, I believe they called it.
Okay.
And we had a 17-week basic, and about the only thing that was significant that I recall was we had introduction with an old M1 rifle, and we had to qualify as marksman, sharpshooter, or expert. And I qualified as a sharpshooter. I missed expert by 1 point. I got 179, and I would have been expert if I'd have gotten 180.
Really? Even with your eye, like you were
I
able
used
to...
my good eye.
Yeah, there you go.
So I was, after basic training, I was assigned to what's called an ASTP, Army Specialized Training Program. And they would send people to college and study engineering. I had finished 2 years of engineering college before I got in the Army. So I was sent down to the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. But I think for some reason they closed up that program after about 6 weeks. And I went to the Signal Corps out in Camp Crowder, Missouri. And there I studied to be a cryptographic technician. And they invited me to have a re-examination of my eyes while I was there. And I passed 20/20. So it put me on general service. And toward the end of, 1944, I guess it was, I was assigned to a cryptographic team of 4 men, and we went west, ended up in Hollandia, New Guinea. And from there, we went to Leyte in the Philippines. And I stayed there close to a year. MacArthur had come into the same area 3 or 4 weeks ahead of the time we got there. And he moved on north with the invasion of Luzon and on up to Okinawa, Iwo Jima, and places like that. So I stayed on Leyte until I was going to be transferred to the 14th Corps headquarters as a rear echelon during the invasion of Japan, which did not happen, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But I went up to Luzon right after VJ Day. The war was officially over. One of the most interesting things I ran into there was that I worked in the signal center, and I received a letter from a General Yamashita, I believe is his name, and he was offering to surrender. It was a typewritten letter to the highest commander of the Allied forces in the Pacific. So it was my routine to pass it on to whoever it was addressed to, so that was kind of interesting. Then after the war was officially settled out, I went to Japan for a few months and spent a few months in Sendai, Japan, which became famous with a more recent storm they had, the tsunami and all of that problems.
Mm-hmm.
And back to Yokohama, and I came home in 1946.
What was your relationship, or how did you communicate with folks back home, your family, your friends, while you were in the service?
We had good mail service.
Mm-hmm.
I probably wrote a letter roughly once a week, I would think,
Mm-hmm.
to family and friends. It was easy to find girlfriends by mail from overseas.
Did you still keep in contact with anybody that you served with after the war? Did you belong to any sort of affiliations or groups, or did you stay in contact?
The one significant contact I made while I was in the Philippines on Leyte, my brother-in-law to be was in the 77th Division,
Mm-hmm.
and they had been involved in the first initial invasion of Guam, and I was in the signal center, and I addressed the teletype communications that were going to the various places. So when I heard the 77th Division was on Leyte, I inquired and found out where they were, so I went down and visited him. And I didn't know for sure that I would recognize him because I only met him once or so back in South Carolina. But I did meet him, and we had a little visit. And they went around and made an invasion on the western side of Leyte. MacArthur's invasion was on the eastern side, just south of Tacloban, which you've heard quite a bit about in the latest storm weather problems. So after they had the invasion on the western side, they came back around to the eastern side, and then they moved on to Iwo Jima, I believe was the actual place they went to from Leyte. And when I was looking him up the first time I went down to where they were camped, I knew the battalion number he was in. So when I found the location, I saw a man outside. I asked him if he knew Russ McCann. He said, "Oh, he's my best friend." So he took me right in and showed me where Russ was. And the sad part is that Alani was his name. Now, he was killed on Hiroshima. So that was the only real close acquaintance I had who was killed. I had a relatively safe time myself, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was lucky.
Yeah. Did you did you have it looks here that you had some medals that you
Oh, they had routine medals. I think I got the good conduct medal.
mm-hmm.
What, Asia Pacific? I forget. There were several of those general medals.
Mm-hmm.
I was never in a serious combat location, even though it was considered a combat zone. And I got my first sample of cigarettes. They issued free cigarettes in the combat zone. I never smoked a cigarette, but I didn't like them, so I gave them away
Oh.
to my friends. And until we found out that you could sell them in town. And then my friend who used to smoke 2 packs a day decided he'd go with us and sell his. And he quit smoking it.
It's more profitable to sell them, I guess.
So I think I have not smoked a cigarette since then, what, 1944?
Were they the unfiltered kind of cigarettes?
Yes, I see, they started Camels every now and then, but they got down to, what, Chelsea and a few that the Filipinos didn't care for. They had to be a name brand.
Yeah. Yeah. What were the rations like? I mean, what was the cigarettes certainly, but what were you surviving on in terms of food?
We got our share of corned beef hash.
Mm-hmm.
That's about the only thing that was that consistent. We didn't have any fresh eggs. They would make omelet out of powdered eggs. I survived on it.
Yeah.
But the first time I had ice cream was actually on VJ Day when Japan had first offered to surrender. We were in transition on our way up to Luzon, and they moved us down to the staging area. And on VJ Day evening, all of the ships out in the Lady Harbor shot off their anti-aircraft weapons, and it was the biggest fireworks display I've ever seen. All these ships shooting the tracers up in the air and around. It's just like the 4th of July fireworks displays.
Yeah, what was that like? It sounds like a really big, it's a really big celebration, a big party.
Oh yes, it was, and we had ice cream for the first time in a year or so. Had a whole canteen cup full of ice cream. And it was about a good pint in it.
Was it difficult for? Did basic training help you adjust to the weather conditions or the close quarters living conditions, things that you had to face when you were actually serving?
Yes, I had a very good basic training. I think it was probably one of the best, 17 weeks, where some of them were only, 6 to 8 weeks. But we did a lot of walking, built bridges and various things like that. I wore out 2 pair of Army shoes in basic training. We were in the water quite a bit. And I got good training. I became a Boy Scout leader after I got out because they figured I knew everything necessary.
And did you?
I knew enough to get by with the Scouts. I knew most of the knots that were usable, and I'd done a little camping out and such.
Yeah. And what was it like then coming home? What was the experience like when you were? How long were you over for?
Oh, about a year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
I was almost a year on Leyte in the Philippines. I was in the Army, I believe, 32 months, just under 3 years.
Yeah.
So when I came home in February, so I was able to start school at the beginning of the next term. Let's see, I forget exactly. I guess it was in September when I started back to school and finished college. And I noticed a big difference in the population that I had contact with, I didn't run into any of my old friends back home. Most of them had moved on. I had one good friend, the one I had palled around with before I got in the Army. He got in the Navy. And he and I took a little trip just before I went to the Army. I had a week off after I got sworn in. And we took a motorbike trip for 160 miles up to Myrtle Beach. Just the two of us, and came back, and I didn't see him again until after the war was over. So, what other questions you want to?
Oh no, I'm
give me.
I'm just you know, I'm interested. You were 18 when you joined, and I'm just thinking about the experiences of really like a kid. I mean, you were a kid when you were enlisting, and I was just wondering. I mean, you went to a place that you've never seen before, and you know, it's fascinating to hear about people's impressions of you're in the Philippines. That's a long way from South Carolina.
Yes, I was quite impressed with the travel I was able to take place in. I actually did a little traveling when I was about 3 years old, but I didn't remember much of that.
Right.
I was born in Ohio when I moved to Kansas, and then I moved to South Carolina by the time I was 3. I experienced the worst cyclone or tornado, as I think they now call them, in Medicine Lodge, Kansas, when I was 3 years old. But I don't have very much recollection of that one.
Yeah. Was it frightening? Did you have any anxiety about like being in a different place?
Well, yes, it was strictly unknown. You never knew what to expect.
Yeah.
When we were on a troop ship going over to the Pacific, they don't ever announce where you're going.
Mm-hmm.
You just get your duffel bag and come with us.
Oh, is that right? So they don't give you any sort of indication of where you're...
No, and we went on a single unescorted troop ship. They said there were about 5,000 troops on it. USS Seabarb. I never have dug into the historical record of what the Seabarb did, but they had the initiation when you cross the equator.
The initiation?
You're not a sailor, are you?
No. But.
Well, King Neptune is recognized when you cross the equator. Everybody gets initiated, at least the Army troops did. When you cross the equator, they have the court, and it happened to be so many officers on the ship that the enlisted men didn't go through the initiation until the next day. And the sign that you had been through the initiation was that your head was shaved off. They took a razor and shaved a big diagonal swab across the top of your head, so you had to get a haircut. And I had several barbers there were set up busy. But just before we left Camp Stoneman in California, our crowd of about, I think it was about 16 of us, we down got our hair shaved off a few days before we got on the ship. And I didn't actually have to go through the initiation because I already had the sign. But we got a chance to watch all the officers on the shipboard get humiliated and hose the hose down with a hose and crawl through a big canvas hose, and people beating on boat battles and shooting water with them and things like that.
Yeah. And that's every time you cross the equator. That's
the first time.
First time you cross the equator. Okay.
You become a shellback instead of a pollywog. You're a pollywog until you've crossed it, then you're a shellback.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Well, I had never heard of it before.
Yeah.
Kind of fun going through.
Yeah.
Especially I missed the dirty part.
Yeah. Well, good for you. You had enough foresight and to be able to avoid that, I guess.
Well, we didn't plan it. It just happened.
It just happened that way. Well, you got lucky then, I guess.
We figured we're going overseas. We won't need our hair for several years.
Yeah.
had a beard growing contest on the way over. And
Mm-hmm.
the one that had a long black beard, I don't know how he did that in 1 month. We were on the water about 30 days. I had to shave when I got over there, but
Yeah,
I didn't compete with the contest.
that's good. And then, did it take any sort of adjustment? I mean, you went right back to school when you got back to South Carolina and re-entered school. Did you go back to Knoxville then, or?
Well, that's a whole other story. I liked Knoxville. I thought they had a very good engineering professor in particular, and I planned to go back there for my third year. I'd completed 2 years at the University of South Carolina. So when I got home, the first thing I wanted to do for a vacation was take a motorcycle trip. I got a motorcycle and I went out to the Midwest, about a 3,500-mile trip. And my first stop was Knoxville, Tennessee. I wanted to just verify that I could get in, because I was from a different state. So I went to the university and then made an inquiry, and they said, "Oh, there's no problem." And I said, "Sure, you can come and just come up in September." And they gave me the dates, and I wanted to know if there's anything about being an out-of-state student that would interfere with that. And they said, "Oh, no problem." So I went on my way, and when it came September, time to sign up, University of South Carolina started, I think, a week earlier than University of Tennessee. So I began to wonder, do I really want to do that? So I gave up on Tennessee and I enrolled back in the University of South Carolina. And about within a week, I got a letter from the University of Tennessee saying, "We're sorry that we're not accepting the out-of-state students this year." So I lucked out again.
Yeah.
So that was the last I saw of the University of Tennessee.
And maybe fast forward a little bit. So you say you've been living here now for about 20, 23 years?
About 20, let's see, I guess 23, 24.
And
We came down in 1989.
1989. And what prompted that trip, that move?
My wife is from here. She was born and grew up through her high school years. And her father had died in 1989. So we came down to live here at that point. I had retired from General Electric, where I worked in Schenectady, New York. I was there about 32 years. So I came down here, and we've been here ever since.
Is there anything additional you'd like to say about your time in the service, or the experience of being in the war at such a young age, or anything else that you'd like to talk about the experience?
Well, it was quite uneventful compared to what so many of the Army personnel had to go through. I just felt very fortunate to have avoided having been in a place where it was that dangerous. We were in a place where they had some 3 plane loads of airborne troops landed within 5 miles of where we were in the Philippines. But the captain woke everybody up about, 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and it was the first time he had inquired is, "What kind of ammunition do you have?" It was Signal Corps, it's not a combat organization. He said, "We got 45 ammunition. Now, how many of you have 45 caliber weapons?" Only the officers had 45 caliber. He didn't know that. We had a 30 caliber carbine. And when we left New Guinea, we were instructed to go through a line and get some ammunition before we got on a troop ship going from New Guinea up to the Philippines, which is where the active war was taking place. Mm-hmm. So they gave each of us 5 bullets to put in our pocket to take with us. They didn't give us a full clip. You know, carbine, a semi-automatic, you have a clip of, I forget how many, 9 or 10, something like that.
Mhm.
They gave us 5.
5.
But the whole time I was in the Pacific, I never fired a gun. I was very fortunate to have not been exposed to that danger.
Very lucky, very fortunate.
We came through the edge of a couple of typhoons and things like that, but it was a great experience. Not quite like a paid vacation, but very, very good travel experience.
That's great. Thank you so much for sitting down with us today. Appreciate you taking the time to tell the stories, and thank you for your service, and appreciate you talking with us today.
Well, you're very welcome. It's been a pleasure doing it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.